Have you ever wondered how your muscles actually produce movement? When you bend your elbow, walk, run, or even maintain your posture, your muscles are constantly working behind the scenes. But here's the interesting part, not all muscles in your body are the same. There are different types of muscle tissue, each with a different structure and function. And when we talk specifically about skeletal muscle, understanding its structure, origin, and insertion, and the way it contracts becomes extremely important in physiotherapy. So in this video, we'll cover four things. First, the three types of muscle tissue. Second, the structure of skeletal muscle. Third, what origin and insertion actually mean. And the different types of muscle contraction. Our body has three types of muscle tissue: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. Let's quickly understand each one. Skeletal muscle is the type of muscle that is primarily responsible for voluntary movement. For example, when you decide to lift your arm, walk, kick a ball, or perform a squat, skeletal muscles are involved. They are attached to the bone through ligaments. Under the microscope, skeletal muscle appears striated, meaning it has alternating light and dark bands. And importantly, skeletal muscle is generally voluntary, meaning we can consciously control it. Cardiac muscle, as the name suggests, is the muscle found in heart. Its main function is to continuously contract and relax to pump blood throughout the body. It is also striated, but unlike skeletal muscle, its contraction is involuntary. It also has specialized structures called the intercalated disc, which help cardiac muscles communicate and contract together. Finally, we have smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is found in the wall of many hollow organs such as the intestine, stomach, urinary bladder, and blood vessels. Unlike skeletal and cardiac muscle, smooth muscle does not have visible striations. Its contraction is also involuntary. For example, when a food moves through your digestive tract, smooth muscle is responsible for much of that movement. So, in a simple way to remember, skeletal is voluntary and striated, cardiac is involuntary and striated, smooth is involuntary and non striated. Now, let's focus on the muscle that is especially important for movement and physiotherapy, that is, the skeletal muscle. Structure of a skeletal muscle. A whole skeletal muscle is not just one giant piece of tissue, it has a very organized structure. Think of it like a cable made up of smaller cables, which are themselves made up of even smaller structures. At the largest level, we have the whole muscle. The entire muscle is surrounded by connective tissue called the epimysium. If we cut the muscle and look inside, we find bundles called fascicles. Each fascicle contains individual muscle fibers. The fascicle is surrounded by another connective tissue layer called the perimysium. Now let's zoom in even further. Inside each fascicle are individual muscle fibers called the muscle cells. Each muscle fiber is surrounded by connective tissue called the endomysium, and inside every muscle fiber are structures called the myofibrils. This is where things get really interesting. Myofibrils contain repeated functional unit called the sarcomeres, and the sarcomere is considered the basic functional unit of skeletal muscle contraction. A sarcomere contains two important contractile proteins, actin and myosin. During muscle contraction, these proteins interact with each other and produce force. This is explained by the sliding filament mechanism. The actin and myosin filaments don't actually shorten themselves. Instead, they slide past each other, causing the sarcomere to shorten. And when millions of sarcomeres shorten together, the entire muscle can produce contraction. So let's quickly go from the largest to smallest. Whole muscle, fascicle, muscle fiber, myofibril, sarcomere, actin, and myosin. Now there's another important concept here, the connective tissue coverings. The epimysium surrounds the entire muscle, the perimysium surrounds each fascicle, and the endomysium surrounds each individual muscle fiber. These layers don't just provide protection, they also help transmit the force produced by the muscle towards the ligament and eventually towards the bone. And that brings us to the next concept called the origin and insertion. If you have studied anatomy, you have probably come across the terms origin and insertion. But what do they actually mean? In simple terms, origin is traditionally described as the attachment of muscle that is relatively more fixed during a particular movement. The insertion is the attachment that is relatively more mobile. When a muscle contracts, it generally pulls the insertion towards its origin. However, remember that this is traditional anatomical description. In real movement, things can be more complicated because muscles can work in different ways depending on the activity. Let's take a simple example. Consider the biceps brachii. The biceps across the elbow joint and attaches proximally to the scapula and distally to the radius. Traditionally, its proximal attachments are considered its origin, while its distal are the insertion. When the bicep contracts during elbow flexion, it produces a force that helps bring the forearm towards the upper arm. Another important point is that the muscles don't always simply pull a bone towards another bone in isolation. They work together with other muscles. For example, during elbow flexions, the bicep does not always work alone. Other muscles, including the brachialis, the brachioradialis, also contribute. This is why understanding muscle attachments is important in physiotherapy. If you know where a muscle originates, where it inserts, and what joint it crosses, what movement it produces, you can better understand its function. Now we come to the final and probably one of the most important concepts called the muscle contraction. We hear the word contraction, we often imagine a muscle simply getting shorter, but that's not always what happens. Muscles can produce force in different ways. The major types we commonly discuss are the isometric, concentric, eccentric contraction. Let's understand each one. Isometric contraction is iso means same, metric refers to the length. In an isometric contraction, the muscle produces tension without a significant change in its overall length. A simple example is holding a dumbbell still with your elbow bent. Your biceps is producing force, but your elbow isn't moving. Another example is a plank. Your muscles are working to maintain your position even though there is a little visible movement at the joint. So, isometric is tension without significant movement. Next is concentric contraction. This occurs when a muscle produces force while shortening. Think about performing a biceps curl. As you lift the dumbbell upward and bend your elbow, the biceps contract and shortens. That's a concentric contraction. So, muscle shortens while producing force. Finally, we have the eccentric contraction. This is where things get interesting. During an eccentric contraction, the muscle produces force while lengthening under load. Take the same bicep curl as an example. When you slowly lower the dumbbell back down, gravity is pulling the weight downward. Instead of simply allowing the weight to fall, your biceps control the movement while lengthening. That's an eccentric contraction. Another great example is walking downstairs. Your quadriceps help the descent by producing force while lengthening. So, eccentric is muscle produces force while lengthening. A simple way to remember all three is concentric, shortening, isometric, same length, eccentric is lengthening. So let's quickly put everything together. There are three types of muscle tissue: smooth, cardiac, and skeletal. Skeletal muscle is primarily voluntary and striated. Cardiac muscle is involuntary and striated. Smooth is involuntary and non striated. The organization of the skeletal muscle goes as muscle, fascicle, muscle fiber, myofibril, sarcomere, actin, and myosin. Origin is traditionally relatively fixed attachment, while insertion is the relatively mobile attachment. And muscle contractions can be concentric, that is shortening, isometric, tension without significant change in length, eccentric, lengthening under tension. And that's the basic foundation of muscle tissue and skeletal muscle mechanics. Understanding these concepts isn't just about memorizing anatomy. Once you connect structure with function, topics like exercise therapy, biomechanics, muscle testing, and rehab become much easier to understand. If this video helped you understand the basic, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more physiotherapy content. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, keep learning. Thank you.